be a sponge, and then bring the juice.
By focusing on your improvement, by focusing on your progress, and eliminating any fixed mindset that you may have and acts of perfectionism, then you encourage your own mastery.
On some level, we do what we want to do 24 hours a day. Now, sometimes it may not seem like that, but if I'm choosing to work instead of sleep, what I'm actually saying is keeping my job is more important than sleeping.
I'm tired of this. I'm tired of getting beat. What can I do to get over this hump? So mentally, that's when I kind of put that forefront, like, hey, it's either all or nothing.
I like to put failure in quotations because I don't believe that failure is true failure if you're looking at it with the right mindset.
The truth is, the journey to greatness is hard. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes focus, and every day you have to decide what you value, what you want to pursue, and what you want to achieve. And if you dig deep enough, if you push hard enough, we all have what it takes to be great. Welcome to the Edge of Greatness. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Edge of Greatness podcast. I'm your host, Charles Schultz, and today I have with me a very special guest, a mental performance coach and owner of CM Mental Performance, Carly Musser. Carly, thank you so much for taking time to join me today.
Yeah, so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So while I was preparing for this conversation, there was something I found really interesting, and I have to start there. So I found a Facebook page. I found a Twitter, an Instagram, a LinkedIn, an email. I even found a cell phone of some kind, but I couldn't find a website. Can you tell me more about what's that all about?
Yeah, so you did your research. I love that. That's awesome. So I love that you asked me that question. So my website is en route. But when I first opened up my practice, actually, I just hit the 2-year mark, this summer, which is a huge blessing. So excited. And when I first was, opening up my own practice, I mean, that's not something that you're really taught in college or in grad school. Right. And I entered the field in 2014, had an undergrad degree in sport and exercise psychology, which was awesome. But while, the growth of the field, then let alone not really knowing anybody that had their own practice, there was just so much over time. And when I really took a leap of faith and opened it in 2020, I really talked to a lot of people that I confided in, and some mentors. And as far as, what do I need to prioritize? So my first step, was getting an LLC, of course. And then my second step was, hey, do I need a website like that? And I really went back and forth with it for a while. And I kind of was guided in the direction, that it wasn't that important in the moment. And simply because of the growth of social media, and all of those things. And so to be honest, I kind of just put it off on the back burner for a bit. And then as time went on, it really was cool. Like, for instance, I've had some clients or people reach out to me that are part of a Facebook baseball moms group that live in all over, the US, and that have reached out to me. And that wasn't through a website. That was through, could a website open more doors? Absolutely. Do I feel like now I'm at the point where I need one? For sure. But it just kind of became, one of those things, and you get caught up in life and you have to prioritize what's most important right now. And just after talking with people from the get-go, it was kind of like, well, I had one right away. I didn't really necessarily need one. And then over time, it kind of became life gets, nuts. So there's your answer the long way around.
Well, I think that's a very important point, though, is that a lot of people, when they look at entrepreneurship and starting your own business and doing all these things, they don't realize that a lot of times it's just you that's doing the work. So when it comes down to doing the important thing, what's important now, how do you go about deciding what the important thing is in this moment? Because I'm sure a lot of people would look at it and be like, you need a website, but you chose a different route and now you're 2 years in. So tell me more about how you decide what's important now.
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, I'm a gal that is very strong in my faith. So through every step from opening my practice, was all I felt God pushing me to do so. So that was kind of the first thing, and just honestly praying, on it throughout. And, it's one of those things that looking back, like I really wouldn't change it because my I think like my confidence grew so much in just knowing my value over time and knowing who I was as a person and also as a practitioner. Um, and I think that that helped to reveal more by not having a website because my clients were word of mouth, right? And that simply to me, that my biggest thing is when I have a phone call from a parent or I have, a text message from, a baseball player in the minors, or whatever it is. And they're like, Carly, it clicked today. Or, wow, my kid is improving, not just in, but in school too. That is what I'm like, heck yes, that's my purpose. Right. So I think for me, I've been blessed to have that, and not everybody's path, doesn't work that way. Could I have more clients now if I would have had a website? Maybe, maybe not, it just depends. But I think that I'm right where I'm supposed to be. And that's just literally, again, all links to my faith and where I feel like God has me right now. But I think that you bring up an absolutely great point, and especially for anybody listening, like we just think that we're going to jump into something and things are going to go like that. I'm 2 years later, and I've again, like, I was talking to a mentor the other day, and she was like, Carly, you have to remember how far you've come, right? We're so ingrained to want the next thing, the next client to, do whatever it is. And it's like, you have to pause and reflect and remember that dream, however many years ago, you're living it, but also just being by yourself, like you said. I mean, I feel I could be like, oh man, I feel, like I wasn't, but you don't think about all the time that you spent responding to emails, responding to text messages, responding to calls, writing invoices. And you're by yourself, right? Like I was joking with my mom. I'm like, Mom, someday I'm gonna pay you to do my paperwork, right? But like 100% because you're only one person. And so I think for me, like the part that I love is this field, or just entrepreneurship in general. I never was somebody that I wanted to be like everybody else. I never wanted to, everybody's swimming this way against the current. I'm going to swim the opposite direction, And so I think for me, mine really was just a lot of taking a giant leap of faith, amid the pandemic. Looking back, I'm like, most people probably think I'm crazy, but it's just how it is. And so I think that a big thing that we have to do is just like in school, you're placed into this box, and just remembering that there's no one size fits all approach. Maybe that person that's just starting out, they should have their website because of where they're living or connections or whatever it might be. But I think that at the end of the day, like it doesn't make you a good practitioner or not a good practitioner if you have a website or not, in my personal opinion.
Absolutely. No, I would agree with that. So tell me a little bit more about what drew you to mental performance and working with athletes.
Yeah. So, another question that I love answering. So when I was a senior in high school, I'd say I had a behavioral science class, and I absolutely fell in love with psychology. I was like, heck yes, this is great. Love this. I thought I wanted to go the clinical route. I'm very close to my family. Had a conversation with my dad, and he was like, Carly, I know how much you care about people. This just like, concerns me, like for X, Y, and Z, but if this is like what you want to do, like that's amazing. So that challenged me. I kind of like, was like, yep, I agree. Then thought I wanted to go the exercise science route, right? Like we go back and forth between what the heck do I want to do for the rest of my life. So that, I kind of was like, no, not really about that. And then my advisor then of freshman year recommended it. I jumped into it come sophomore year and absolutely just fell in love with the field. But again, like I feel so blessed because when I was in grad school, I went to Barry University in Florida, and I was the only one in my cohort, and it was a small cohort that had an undergrad degree in sports psych. So that's like very rare. So I fell in love with the field early on back when it was like, I have to get a PhD if I want to do this. I have to, I kept grinding. And so I really discovered it early on than a lot of people have, now. I mean, way before CMPC, way before, all of those things. But I think the biggest thing that I absolutely love about this profession and like what I do is that you can apply it to every aspect of life, right? Like self-awareness is something that so many people lack, unfortunately. And I think it's a matter of not just talking to an athlete, but like talking to the whole person, right? Like the first time that I do an intake with an individual, I get to know them. I'm like, what's your favorite food, or what's your favorite movie, or what's your favorite season? I get to know them as the full person, not just who they are as an athlete, right? So I just think as a whole, like why I love it and why I fell in love with it consistently is that it's constantly wanting to get better, right? It's constantly wanting to better yourself. And I think now, flash forward to 2022, post COVID, so many people are still struggling. And I think that there is still this need for needing to better ourselves mentally, right? And there's still this stigma. So it's just really cool to see the kind of like back then to now. And again, going back to my faith, like I had no idea. I knew so many people switching out of this field because they didn't know what they would do with it. And I remember talking to my brother, he's also a successful entrepreneur. And I was like, Zach, I don't know. Like, I don't know what to do. And he's like, well, what else do you want to do? And I was like, well, nothing. He's like, then go do it. And I was like, okay. And here we are. So, I mean, it was challenging, in a new field and like not knowing what was to come. So yeah, pretty cool.
You mentioned you fell in love immediately in a high school class. What was it about the human behavior science class that you took that you were like, man, this is me. I want this?
Yeah, I think just like the psych nature as a whole, there was just something about it that I found. Like I'm somebody that like, I love mysteries. Like I don't like gory, but I love like thrillers and movies, right? Like I love that mystery piece. And I just think that there was so much about just when I was learning and just something just attracted me to the brain. I've always been kind of way more of like a science person than like social studies back in the day, we obviously don't call it that now, but social studies and, all of that stuff, like science just always kind of, there was just some draw in me to science. And just when it came to the brain, I just think that like, I know in high school, like I always was, like I would second guess myself on tests. I would second guess a lot of things. And I just think that once we started talking about the brain and a lot of things, I just felt like I personally clicked with it. And I was like, wow, I relate to this a lot.
That makes sense. Absolutely. So I think we're at a point now. I feel like we've reached this point where people are recognizing the importance of mental health and mental performance. But what's been your biggest struggle with getting people to move from the acknowledging the value of it to actually implementing the skills?
Yeah. Great question. Your questions are just so good.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, really, man. I think honestly, the first thing that I thought of when you said that is, I think just the fact of like physically we can see things, right? Like physically, if you let's say, I don't know, for instance, like let's say like the way you kick a soccer ball, right? Like a coach can see like if you're kicking with the side of your foot or your toe, like early from the get-go, right? Like we're able to see things physically a lot of times. And I think there's a lot of people that rely on that. So it's kind of one of those things that they're like, well, a big question I get from whether it's athletes or parents is, well, how do you know if it's working? And I just said, I rely on my expertise. I rely on my knowledge and doing this for years, right? It's just like I pick up so much, or mental performance coach picks up on body language, right? Like there's so much that we learn from nonverbal cues, but how much of the population pays attention to that, right? Like just in general. So I think like one of the biggest things is, or questions that I get is, well, how do you know it's working? And it's just, I use different like measures, or I use different questionnaires or different things like that, right? To be able to track that stuff so that they can see, so I can see. But there's just so much value in just simply saying, oh, today like for instance, I had a client one time, she was like, yeah, today I didn't think, oh, I have to fix this. I just like let it be. Amen. Right. Like, so it's just finding those things. And it's funny because my thesis was very heavily qualitative, some quantitative, but very heavily qualitative. So that kind of makes me think back to that as well, right? A lot of times people want to rely to research that is quantitative. They want those numbers, which is understandable. But I think it's just that we're in a world where we want numbers, right? Like money numerically, weight numerically, right? Like all these different things. So I think that is honestly one of the biggest things, or the biggest challenges, I guess I can say. But that also doesn't frighten me when people ask me that. I'm like, well, I'll just give me some time and we'll see. And it's all good.
So typically when you're working with somebody, do you find that they realize that it's working, or do you have to point it out?
One of my favorite lines is, well, let me think about that for a second. I didn't really notice that till now, right? Like the light bulb going off. So they might not always realize it right then and there, but just by saying that, and then I'll say, wait, did you realize what you just said? Or there'll be like, oh wow, I didn't think about that before. So sometimes it's kind of a 50-50. And again, it depends. Like I do work with some youth athletes, so it depends kind of, just on the age. But a lot of times they'll kind of say it out loud, and I'm just kind of like, wait, hold up. Did you see what you said here? And then they're like, oh yeah. And then they get this big smile, right? Because it's like, oh shoot. So to answer your question, kind of 50-50, but a lot of times I think they kind of realize it because they're noting it, but they just aren't realizing, whoa, like there's the spark, right?
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And you mentioned something there. You work with youth athletes as well as older athletes and professional athletes. And I'm a personal trainer by trade normally throughout the day, and I work with the same thing. I work with young athletes, high school, college, and beyond. Do you find that when you're working with a youth athlete versus working with an older athlete, that there's a different rate of uptake when it comes to being able to implement and apply the skills you're teaching? Because for myself, I notice a new person who comes to training has a large jump in gains in the beginning part. Like you go through the first 8 weeks of training cycle, they're going to have a big jump in performance. And then it slowly starts to like incline less over time because they're stronger. They don't have as much room to grow. Does that similarly happen with the people you work with, or is it different because it's the mind?
It's very interesting because, I think some people have a certain opinion about like, how far, and I do have some friends, certain practitioners that they only go like, let's say 16 and up, right? Or 18 and up. But it is interesting. And I think that it does kind of go back to that, like person to person, because I have a youth athlete who, is about to enter middle school, and he's been so receptive, and he literally has improved his confidence so much, like is almost a new person. And I've been working with him we just hit like a year mark. So he's grown so much in that year. Right. And I wouldn't say that it's like any different than, like somebody who's 25. Right. So it is interesting to see. And I'm sure that some of it goes with like learning styles, right? Just like for you with like working, you're involving the mind, but like if you're physically showing them stuff and they're physically doing stuff, right? Like some of them might be kinesthetic learners. Some of them might be like, they have to whatever. But honestly, it's interesting because I really feel like it's kind of been dependent upon the individual. And even an example of that is I was doing winter training at this baseball academy this last winter, and I had a group of guys, and it ranged from like 8 or 9 to like 14, I'd say. And over time, like they're just a ton of them in a room and they just like want to goof off. And, I had to kind of like set the bar and say, hey, I'm here to, whatever, what you want to get out of this is on you. And at the end, I was kind of just asking them, like, what are 3 things you learned? What are 3 things that like could make this better? And like, what's one thing that you like didn't like about it, or something along those lines. And they actually like all had way more things that they liked than like didn't like. And I was honestly like shocked. Like they got me. Like I was shocked at how much they improved, or like how much like parents were saying like, yeah, this really was impactful for them. Even when I felt like, okay, it's youth and like I feel like they're not getting a lot out of it. Like it was so cool to see that they got way more out of it than I even realized. So that I just want to throw that in there to kind of also answer your question. So I'm sure that there is a little bit of a difference because of the like mind, but there's still that correlation. So it probably just depends on the person and the group, honestly.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that there are differences between working with male athletes and female athletes?
I would say the only biggest difference, or one of the biggest differences, is that just, of course, the way that females are, we tend to be more emotional. We tend to be in our heads a lot more overthinkers. And like, men can be the same way, right? Like men can, so I don't like to say that, but just naturally, and like because of our hormones and how we're created, of course there is a little bit of a difference, but like that's not to say, like I know of a lot of baseball players, especially pitchers, that get in their head so much, that overthink, that like lose sleep at night because they're just circling and circling and circling. So honestly, like I'll put it this way, I wouldn't say that I have to, if I'm working with a female athlete or a male athlete, that I think, oh, okay, I have to switch this session around because they're a male or because they're a female, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that
so
makes
it's
sense.
really just, yeah. And it's honestly that way even too with like if I be working with a college team versus high school. Like for a long time I thought that you had to adjust so much, but it's really the same skill set. You're just like, the language you use is different, right? So like something I would say is that varies, maybe the language you use, right? Like for instance, before I'm working with a team of like baseball guys, right? And I politely said, because I doing an activity and then we were coming back, so I started talking, and I politely said to these 2 guys who were talking when I was, hey, do you have something else you wanted to add, or are you just trying to talk over me? Like, and they were like, and it's really how you go about saying that. Now, would I say that to a group of females? No, I'd be like, hey, what's going on? Like that's just an example of something that I use differently. But I would say there's not a big difference. It's just knowing like what language you can use. And I think that's a big thing coaches need to remember, because they might be used to, let's say, coaching males and then switch to like females, and they're like, toughen up, let's go. And like girls will crumble, So that I think is just the biggest thing that I would say. It's just keeping that in mind and what language you use, just in general though.
Yeah. So I love that. And I think there's some interesting things there, because I've coached baseball, I've coached softball, so I've worked with guys and girls. I've coached girls volleyball as well. So I've had this experience across multiple age groups and men and women and all that different stuff. So what I'm curious about with you is, can you talk about some of the challenges that you've faced as a woman working in a male sport?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I honestly have been super, super lucky. I will say that during grad school and like when I was in Florida and working with a soccer academy of all different ages, I didn't feel valued as much. And I kind of felt, like, all right, there's just this, and there's, different coaches, there's all different ages, whatever. I didn't really feel valued. But my college baseball team, the coach is an amazing person. He is like mid-30s, I'd say. He has, 2 kids, happily married, very strong in his faith. Like, he has created a culture. And because of that culture, I'm very well respected since day one, right? I had to earn that respect. I had to earn that trust from the team. But every time that I was in the dugout, and the athletic trainer is a male, so I was literally the only female in there. Anytime that I was in the dugout, like, always very well respected. Like, hey, Carly, how's it going? Hey, Carly, can I talk to you for a second? I just have always, always, always had that. I at times, had to set the groundwork. And if I'm doing a session and they're talking, I had to, earn my respect that way. As well as, I've some other organizations, if like kind of in the minors, if I was from day one, talking to the coaches, they're like, hey, if you have any problems, like, let me know, that they just know. So I've honestly been blessed thus far. But I do know that, I've had some friends, or I know of some people in the field that don't have it as easy, or that have, like, really had to be careful, or unfortunately, like, switch to another position or a completely different organization because of it. But I think so much of it really is like, and this, I don't want this to come across the wrong way, because, things happen and that are not okay, but how you carry yourself and the respect and the law that you lay down. And if you know for yourself, like, I will not let this happen, no matter what, you have to go in there with that mindset, and people are going to, like, not want to walk on you as much. Right. So again, for me, I've been very blessed thus far. I haven't really felt like, oh, you're a female, so you're not going to know what I'm talking about, which I've been so grateful, working with I work with way more males than I do female athletes. And I never once have felt like and I think it's how you go about it, right? I don't say, one of the best pieces of advice I got from a professor in undergrad was, never say that you know what somebody's going through if you've never been through it. So if somebody had an ACL injury and I never had one, don't say you know what it's like. Say, I can try and understand what it's like. That, so much power in that. And that's kind of my approach. And I think that's why it's helped me. And why I haven't had that, like, butting heads with anybody, because I just say, I can try and understand. I'm here for you. What's going on?
That makes sense. I get that. How much of this do you think comes from the top down when it comes to the culture that's created to help integrate the different people that are on staff, to feel welcome, to feel included, to feel part of the family, more or less?
Well, I'll say, especially for college, I think that so much of it comes from, like, the coaches and down. I don't even know that I would say as much. And I think it depends on the university, maybe some D1 versus D2, D3, but not as much that. I think so much of it stems from, like, the head coach, and just, like, how they create their culture. And that's just something that I've honestly seen. I think as you get, higher up or in the pros and stuff like that, things can kind of be different just because there's so much. But at least with, like, collegiate, I think so much of it is from, like, the head coach. It stems down from them.
No, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I want to shift gears a little bit here. So I saw a post that you made, and it kind of aligned with a lot of the things that I'm kind of working through right now with building some different things in my own business.
Yeah.
But you were talking about defining the concepts like fear, pressure, stress. And I think this is an important thing to highlight, because I think so many people feel these things and then they give into them. They give them more power. Can you tell me more about this idea that we have the power to define these concepts?
Yeah. So I think that I think it kind of roots back to my conversation earlier about like in school and being placed in these boxes, right? Like we're told, or we kind of grow up, trying to learn emotions and learn what something feels like, right? And then we're taught, oh, in school or whatever, like this is what this emotion is, right? But I think that, for somebody, right? Like if we're talking about pressure, right? I don't know about you, but for me, like I love pressure. Like I love working under high pressure situations. Have there been a few times where maybe it was too much pressure and I felt not prepared? And absolutely. But as a whole, I like feeling pressure, right? Because it means I care. That's how I view it. Whereas somebody who might not like pressure as much, to them, that might be a negative word that they associate it with, right? So I think that like remembering that you have a choice, the way that you view something, the way that you view fear, the way that you view anger, whatever it is, right? Like if I said to you, and I'm gonna ask you because I'm curious. I said, all right, tomorrow we're going skydiving. Do you instantly go into fear mode, or are you like, heck yes, let's go?
So it's a combination for me, which is kind of interesting. So for me, initial thought is yes, okay, I'm in. But in the back of my mind, I've got 2 young kids, I've got a third on the way, I've got a family, and there's risk involved. So I am aware of these things, and that makes me a little uncomfortable. Ask me 20 years ago, I'm on the plane.
You're played. Okay, absolutely. Well, congrats that you have a third on the way. That's amazing.
Thank you.
But so everybody is going to, you're welcome. Everybody is going to interpret that differently, right? For you, it was a combination, which is really cool. But do you see how like that fear aspect, that's why I personally feel like we can't just have this definition, in the dictionary, right? Like we have to we get to let sorry, I can't talk for a second. We should be able to define how we're feeling. We should be able to put into words how this emotion makes us feel, right? Because we're all different and we're all human beings first. So we're not all going to be alike. It shouldn't be a one size fits all approach. So that's pretty much what I mean by it, is the way that you interpret it, and that you can make a change, if you put the work in and if you put the reps in to have a better relationship with fear, with anger, with whatever.
No, I love that. I love that because for myself, my, I guess, relationship with fear has changed over time, where I find myself shying away from things that have a physical danger component to it, where I used to be like, whatever, let's go. But I lean into things that are socially fearful or emotionally fearful, or something that I could fail in front of people and it'd be an embarrassment type of situation. Those I'm like, all right, let's see what happens. I'm going to take a chance and risk it and see what goes on. But if you were to say, let's jump on a motorcycle and go 200 miles an hour, that day's over. I'm past that point. So I find that a very interesting thing. Do you find that people change as they start to get more, I guess, self-awareness of their situation and themselves, that their definitions change too?
Yeah, I think so. And I think like what I was talking about with the, like, do you look at it as like skydiving fearful or, more exciting, like, is that cognitive appraisal, right? So how we view something, how we interpret that. And I do see some people change with it, right? Like their relationship with that. So let's say for a pitcher, right, who feels like they used to feel like when their heart is pumping out of their chest, like, oh my gosh, I'm so nervous, I'm going to mess up. Like there's all these people. And then if we reverse that and say, oh man, you're just so excited, you're pumped up, this is because you're ready to go, right? Like being able to reverse that, it doesn't happen overnight, but yeah, I do find that we are able to fine tune those things, or being able to change your appraisal is key, and it does work.
Yeah. While we're talking about relationships, what I'm curious about next is, tell me about your relationship with failure.
With failure, oh my gosh, I honestly, when I hear the word failure, this is gonna sound terrible or sound weird, but when I hear the word failure, I honestly just want to smile because I think that so many people like want to run from failure. So many people are afraid of failure. And I really, over the years, have learned to embrace failure. I remember reading Mindset by Carol Dweck, amazing book. And when she talked about looking at failure as, man, I'm a failure, I'm the worst, I'm never going to get better, or I stink, versus, okay, this is feedback. How can I grow? How can I learn? I absolutely love that. And so for a long time, I've really like tried to live, have that mindset. Because I'm somebody, I don't want to be, well, first off, I'm a social butterfly. Like I love meeting new people. I didn't always love public speaking, but now I like love it. And I will try to put myself in situations that are, challenging, scary, kind of like you were talking about, to help me grow. And I think for me, like one of the biggest, I'll say, failures was, well, two actually. The first time that I applied for college, actually, I didn't even like get in. And a big part of it was because I was not a good standardized test taker. My SAT scores were just awful. And I went to this, like, it was called like Sylvan Learning Center, like, something. And I met with this lady for like an hour, 2 hours, and she was like, honey, you overthink a lot, don't you? And I was like, I sure do. And she taught me all of these, and my scores improved so much. I reapplied and I got in. So I would look at that as like failure in a sense, and then another one was, I again had it in my mind that I was going to go for my PhD eventually, because that's when I entered the field. That's what I needed. I applied to 5 schools, second year of grad school, didn't get in anywhere. And I remember being home for Christmas break, and I just was, like really bummed. And here comes that self-awareness. I just learned, I was like, why am I putting so much pressure on myself that I have to go right now? Like, why can I not go 2 years from now or 5 years from now? Is it harder to go, get back in the groove? Yeah, of course. But like, why am I doing this? So in my eyes, that was a big like failure. And I felt really like, what did I do wrong? I felt like I was doing everything right. But honestly, it was the greatest thing for me, because I feel like I really was able to work on me, and that helped me even more as a practitioner. My grandparents, who I'm super close with, live back in PA, and they both, one just passed away in June, one passed away almost 2 years ago. I got to spend more time with them. Like, there were just so many blessings. COVID hit. I was grateful to not be in school during COVID, right? Like, so I would say like a big thing for me is, in the moment, how I handle failure is I'm bummed. I am just bummed. But over time, maybe later that day, maybe that next day or a month later, I look at it as, hey, this is just building me. This is just creating resistance that I needed. And, I've just been somebody that things never, no matter what school, no matter like what it was, never came easy for me. And I'm okay with that because I love it. So that's kind of like my relationship with failure is I embrace it. I want to fail, because then I know I'm trying. And I know that I'm, able to gain that feedback. And hopefully over time, that's going to help me to propel forward.
No, I love that answer too. And I love that you own that you're bummed, because I think a lot of people think you either are self-destructive when you fail, or you can't be emotional at all when you fail. And I love the fact that look, I'm upset. I failed. I didn't want to fail. That's not what I was trying to do. And now I'm going to let myself be upset. And then tomorrow I'm going to think about, what can I learn? And I think that's a valuable piece for all this, is that you can still be upset. That's okay. You tried really hard for something and you didn't do well. You're allowed to be a human.
Yeah.
I think that's an important piece for sure.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a great point, because that is 100% more of a mindfulness approach, right? Like when we try to push off how we're feeling, like pretending that we're not nervous. Like when I stand there in front of, I was working with a tennis team months back at a university, and I was talking about nerves and, arousal regulation and butterflies and all that. And I said, guys, I'm real nervous right now. But I said it's because I'm so pumped up and I care so much, right? Like when you just like let down that wall and you just like are able to just be you and be authentic and also just accept how you're feeling, it literally just like is such a relief, like it is such a relief. We just live in a world where we want to protect our ego and we don't want to admit that we're nervous, or we don't want to admit that we're afraid, but why? For what? Right? Like, no matter if you are somebody who is famous, no matter if you're somebody who is, whatever, we're all human beings first. And so that's just something that I've had to just continue to put in my head. And I also tell my athletes and anyone that I honestly meet, because you just reach a point where you're just like, forget this. Like, why, you only get to live one life, and life literally goes like that. So why are we trying to live a life that isn't us, truly us?
Yeah, no, I love that story too, because it reminds me, I actually had a talk with a volleyball team 2 weekends ago now. And one of the kids was like, how are you not nervous right now? And I'm like, oh no, I'm terrified. I hate being in front of all of you. It's the most awful thing ever. But I feel my message is important. I feel my stories are important. I think it can help you. So I'm going to face that fear. I'm going to face that discomfort, and I'm going to do my best to be an athlete and perform. And I think that's a valuable piece. And I love the fact that you're like, yeah, no, I don't want to, I'm nervous right now. I don't like it. I don't want to be here. This is not my comfort zone.
Yeah.
And so I think we all kind of have to face those moments. And I think that's an important piece. One of the things I want to dig into as we begin to wind down is, I often hear from my athletes and the coaches and the people I coach with, I don't have time. What are some ways that you organize your days to maximize your time?
Time is key, right? Do you mean to maximize my time, or how do I respond to their question of, well, I don't have time, so how can you fit this in?
I mean, we can go down both paths, but I was actually curious about how you manage your time so that doesn't become an excuse for you.
So I am somebody that I feel like I'm almost on the opposite end. I'm somebody that I'm always like, okay, yep, you want to do this time, so I'm going to have this person back to back to back to back, right? Like I'm somebody that always makes time. So I really struggle, or I really had to learn the value of unplugging and not burning out. So for instance, like if I'm able to, I will try to, book a client on a day that isn't as heavy. And if it doesn't work out, then okay, we'll go, the other way. Summertime's been great because I feel like people have a little bit more flexibility at times. But there have been times where I, like had, something like family related, like when my nan passed away and we were doing something family related that I had to move to a different day or whatever. So I think for me, the biggest thing has really been learning not to burn myself out. But I'm somebody that I'm so passionate about what I do that I always want to make time. I always want to, take more people under my wing. I always want to meet with more people. But I've really had to learn how to prioritize, because I've had some very like late nights, because of, well, if you're working with people who are in school, like college or high school, like they have practices and then you meet with them later at night. So that's kind of been my biggest challenge, is still prioritizing me and my health and my sleep for that.
So when it comes to a client who's telling you, well, I just don't have time to do mental training, or I don't have time to do my journaling, or I don't have time to do the things that are necessary to get better, how do you approach that?
I pretty much just tell them, well, we make time for the things that are truly important to us. And it's okay if you don't feel like your, your mindset and your brain isn't, as important or isn't a priority, but I'm going to challenge you to think about, and then I'll kind of go down that route. Yeah. So like a big thing for me is I'll say, well, how much, one of the biggest questions that I love to ask people is baseball, especially, right? Like working with teams. I did some talks with parents recently. I'll say, what % of baseball do you think is mental? And what % do you think is physical? Almost always the percentage for mental is so much higher than physically. And I'm like, okay, well, we're doing all of these different things and making that time for all these different things, but what are we doing to get better mentally? Well, nothing. I don't know. Right. Like, so I kind of always go back that way just to kind of get them to realize and say, hey, look, like you might be saying that you think it's so much more like this way, but if you're not doing anything to get better, then you're not going to go anywhere, right? Like you're only going to get to a certain point. And especially I talk with like, especially baseball players. I will challenge them and I'll say, hey, look, like at the pro level, like they know how important like your mindset is, and that's kind of the angle that I take it. So I never try to force. I just kind of try to challenge and say, hey, let's look at it from this angle. Like, why do you think that I believe in this, right? I believe in this because I've seen it work in my life. And I want to show you how it can help you in the long run, So that's kind of how I tackle it.
No, I love the idea that we always make time for the things we want to do because we don't see people giving up their Netflix or scrolling through TikTok or whatever else they're trying to do. But I don't have time to go to the weight room today, or I don't have time to do my mental training, or I don't have time to read my 10 pages, or whatever it may be. The things that make us better, we tend to put off. The things that are fun and easy, we tend to just go, yeah, no, I got time for that. Mm-hmm. So as we finish here, I got one more question for you, and I want to dig into this just a little bit here. In your experience, how much does the mental performance training that you do with athletes transfer to performing in business?
Sorry, transfer into
being able to perform in business. So like, do the skills that you teach for your athletes, do they work the same with people who are in the business world?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. It's cool because when I first decided that I wanted to open up my own practice, this was, senior year in college, undergrad. Knew no one that, had one, obviously. And somebody came and spoke, who he got his PhD from WVU, and he had his own practice. And kind of from that moment on, I knew that I didn't want to just work with athletes. I had this vision to work with surgeons, pilots, all these different things one day. And it's really cool because more recently, like this last half year or spring, I've dove into healthcare, and I worked with some nurse managers, and I worked on helping them build confidence. And that's even with like nurses, right? And I can honestly tell you, it is like the exact same. It's the exact same when I've talked with, business owners and some of the things that like they face and they see. It's the same exact skill set. Whether it would be a pilot, right, dealing with nerves. A lot of times they're not nervous because they get that out in flight school or decide, hey, I can't do this. But it's the same concept of somebody who, let's say, is an athlete and struggling with performance anxiety, or a musician that I did work with who was growing in Nashville, and he was pretty much like everything he was describing is exactly what I see with an athlete. So I 100% think that it's literally the same skill set. It's just applying it to the field or applying it to, the court or whatever it is. So absolutely.
No. I love that. I love it. Well, Carly, I want to say thank you so much for taking time to join me today. Where can my listeners connect with you, find what you're doing? If they want to work with you, reach out. What are some of the ways that they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, thanks so much. I am on Instagram. My you can just type in CM Mental Performance and I should pop up. Twitter, I think my name is Carly Musser. Same thing with LinkedIn. Did I hit them all? Facebook. I have a CM Mental Performance page. So I have them all pretty much. If you either type in Carly Musser or CM Mental Performance, I should come up. And my email is also linked on my Instagram. So
perfect.
Good.
I'll make sure I get all that in the show notes. Yeah. As always, guys, keep reaching for the stars. Fall flat on your face, but remember, whenever we fall, always get up. Thank you for joining us today on the Edge of Greatness podcast. If you haven't yet, please take a minute now to subscribe and review our show. Join us again next week as we continue to dig deeper into the key components of greatness. The path to greatness is never linear, so remember to keep pursuing greatness no matter what. Keep stretching your abilities, reach for the stars, and fall flat on your face. But remember, no matter what happens, whenever we fall, always get up. Until next time, I'm Charles Schultz, and this was the Edge of Greatness podcast.